The job of the government is to ensure that the taxpayers' money is used wisely. And it's amazing to me, as I've done some research on this, trying to find out why is the government saying we're in a crisis situation? Why are they allowing AESO to circumvent our system that we've had in place for years and have served us well, to declare a crisis when my understanding is with the legislation that one must submit a report if in fact there is a crisis or a problem anywhere in the system. And there's been no report submitted to AESO, to the AUC, and so I wonder why they bring that up when in fact they haven't been following their own legislation. But the root of the problem that I understand, talking to several experts in the field, and there are some out there, and why they're not referring to them I don't understand, but AESO is bound by a horribly flawed transmission policy. And the problem is that if you are a repairman and all you're given to repair with is a hammer, you're not going to have a very eloquent job of repairing something. It'll have more dents than repairing. And their policy is about transmissions. And it's a flawed plan because basically what the policy states is that it's at any cost isn't the question. It's unconstrained transmission of electricity. And Albertans, if they're frustrated with anything about constraint problems, it's on our highways. At Calgary-Glenmore, a major concern there is that the ring road is not passed. It's got a problem, and there is no plan B to address it. It's going to be 2013 or longer before the ring road is addressed there. The local traffic is terrible and needs to be addressed immediately. That would be a crisis to many people every morning, every evening in Calgary-Glenmore. But to have a fear that we're not going to have electricity in Calgary-Glenmore, it's not a crisis. It hasn't happened. It's been said for years that it's going to happen, and yet this government wants to put in Bill 50, declare that there's a crisis, and that these power lines must be built at a tune of expected, an overnight cost, they figure right now, projected $14.9 billion. That's an extreme amount of money. We have a huge deficit that I believe the government will be revealing here later this month or early in December, that we're going to see the deficit, projected deficit escalate. I would suspect at over $10 billion, even though the price of gas and oil has gone up. But yet they say that we need to spend up to $14 billion to upgrade our electrical lines. It's interesting that they always talk to and refer to these lines haven't had any upgrades in 20 years, but yet when you look at the depreciation factor on these companies that own these power lines, their assets are increasing. And so obviously if the assets are increasing, there has been maintenance work, there has been expansion, and it's going there. So it's a concern that why would Albertans need to foot a bill for $14 billion when in fact it isn't a crisis, the brown arts haven't been arriving, and the world basically has changed significantly since these proposals were brought forward. But it's interesting because if we go back and look at some of the AESO reports, in 2002 they put out a report. They said there was a need of $1 billion in transmission upgrades. In 2004 they put out a report, and again we're all familiar, I believe, in this assembly of the 2004 report and the need to spend $600 million in today's dollars. It was $300 million back in 2004 to upgrade a line from Edmonton to Calgary, that 500 kV line. And it's interesting that that was challenged in the courts. And the courts actually ruled on that. And I'm trying to see where have I got that document. But the court overturned that application when it was going through a needs basis and said that the AESO was biased in their presentation. And so that transmission line was defeated. And so now we see that the government, in 2007, AESO came out and said $3.5 billion was needed. And the provincial energy strategy was saying, well, gas prices going up through the roof, we need to do this immediately. Gas prices have since collapsed, and it's changed the entire outlook going forward of that industry and also the generation of electricity. It's a major concern. But the Southern Alberta Transmission Reinforcement Project under AESO in 2008, they're talking about $1.8 billion stated, but actually reports coming out now saying there's going to be a $3.4 billion expected cost. And again, the Alberta taxpayers are wondering, why are we doing this? Another interesting part of all of this, and the question that comes up, AESO's put out this latest report saying they need 2 direct current high voltage lines, one on the east and one on the west, to I guess, give us security of the system and ensure that it is viable, when in fact that's a huge overbuilding of it. The good member earlier referred to the cost of building a Cadillac or a Lexus or something else, when in fact we don't need it. And Albertans that are speaking to myself are highly suspicious when they look at the Northern Lights line from Fort McMurray going down to California, that all this is a link in that line for Capital Power, I believe, or is that the Canadian, gosh, I'm getting my companies mixed up here now. But anyways, the bottom line is that the taxpayers are going to foot thousands of kilometers of transmission lines for a company in order to export down to the States. It's also interesting when they talk about the crisis needs, in that that we have this constraint. But when you actually look on the AESO website, you see that constraint starts at 10 or 11 o'clock at night, but it peaks at 2 or 3 in the morning. And there isn't a constraint on Alberta infrastructure here. It's because all of this generation is going on and there's no use for it, and so they want to export it down into the States. And so we need to look at it and say, is that a crisis at 2 in the morning because we can produce electricity but we have no place to ship it? But what's interesting is you pursue the idea of exporting, because I'm all for it. If we can produce electricity and export it, and Albertans can benefit on that, that's great. But if in fact we're exporting it and we're subsidizing those companies and the transmission companies, we have to question that. My understanding is, and we'll be checking the data to ensure that it's correct, but when they're shipping the electricity out through the night, they get a much better rate for the transmission line, saying, well, it's not being used, so we'll give you a reduced rate in order to export your electricity. And so the companies say, well, let's build up more generation because we can ship it out. We don't have to pay the full transmission costs. And my understanding is it's only 1/3 of the actual line cost is being paid, with the thinking that, well, because it's not being used, 1/3 is better than nothing for the traditional line cost. But again, that's what's creating the constraint in the system, is at 2 in the morning, not at 6 in the evening when we're supposedly hitting our peak time, or 7 or 8 in the morning. There isn't a constraint inside the transmission lines here serving industry and the people of Alberta. And so we need to go back and ask that question: who really is going to benefit from building these transmission lines? Is it the Alberta taxpayers, or is it going to be the generators or the transmission people that use taxpayers' money to build these lines? And it looks to me pretty much staring us in the face that this is for the generators and for the transmission companies, not for the Alberta taxpayers. And so we truly do need to question that and to bring that part of the process. But again, the most disappointing part and the concerning part for those people that are following this and realizing what this government is trying to scare Albertans into buying and spending a lot of money in advertising, as well as those companies that will benefit, is that we're in a crisis situation, and such a crisis situation that we need to empower the minister to make that decision rather than go through the needs process that has served this province so well for 50 years. And I might again repeat that in 2004, when AESO wanted to put that line through there, it was challenged by an individual in the La Vesta area group and Joe Anglin who took that right through to the courts, and that line was defeated. It says that it didn't meet the needs test, and there was a bias in that. I want to go back, though, and repeat again that the problem is, and again, I've asked some of these engineers, well, why are we messing up so bad at AESO? Why are they saying we need to have these things? And they say, well, it's because of their policy, their mandate that they're given. And their mandate is to build unconstrained power lines for the transmission of electricity through the province. And we need to change that. What we need to have a mandate is for the AESO, and they are very capable engineers. They do understand the big problem. It's just that their mandate is constrained to transmission lines, when what their mandate should be is to develop an energy policy, not a transmission policy. And therein lies the crux